Whenever one thinks of failed states, lefties are usually quick to point out places like Somalia, Syria, or perhaps South Sudan. But what if France meets the scholarly definition of a failed state? What if the level of actual safety for the common folk is higher in Somalia than most of France? Let's explore. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Now, in light of recent events in France, it may indeed be time to ask honestly whether France is still a country properly governed or if France is a failed state. Now, I do realize that this is a very controversial statement to make, so I will try my best to provide evidence and then you will decide whether I'm right or wrong. The best way I know to argue this is to test the reality against the definition of a failed state. So let's go to the ever-reliable Wikipedia and learn the scholarly accepted definition of a failed state. So, the Wikipedia article for a failed state reads as follows, quote, "A failed state is a political body that has disintegrated to a point where basic conditions and responsibilities of a sovereign government no longer function properly. Likewise, when a nation weakens and its standard of living declines, it introduces the possibility of governmental collapse. The Fund for Peace characterizes a failed state as having the following characteristics. 1. Loss of control of its territory or of the monopoly on the legitimate use of physical force therein. 2. Erosion of legitimate authority to make collective decisions. 3. Inability to provide public services, such as defense, I would say. And 4. Inability to interact with other states as a full member of the international community." Now, I argue that France meets all 4 of these points, though admittedly point number 2 is still up for debate. France no longer interacts with other states as a full member of the international community, since its leaders are busy kissing the feet of Angela Merkel and bowing to the Bruxellian cuckoldry, and this has been the case since at least 2010, and there is no reason to believe this will change anytime soon. Large areas of France are zones urbaines sensibles, which is French way of saying that the Republican law no longer applies and hasn't been enforced for many years now. Following the Nice attacks, the French government simply told everyone to get over it and learn to live with terrorism because the government just cannot defend its own citizens, which is the most basic public service that the government is there to provide to begin with. Because you see, a country whose government-owned railways, for instance, function badly is a country whose government is probably inefficient and should definitely consider privatization of the railway services. But a country whose government cannot provide the basic public service of national defense is, for all intents and purposes, a failed state. Now, at the beginning of this video, I mentioned the recent events, and one may be tempted to think that I mean the Nice attack, or perhaps the last 3 big attacks, the Charlie Hebdo, the Bataclan, and of course Nice. But I don't mean just those. I also mean the hundreds of smaller events that keep on taking place that have become so common in France that they barely make the news anymore. For instance, just in the night between July 13th and July 14th, there have been at least 13 clashes between the members of the Religion of Peace in the sensible urban zones and the weakened and increasingly irrelevant French police. Hundreds of cars have been burned down, dozens of policemen were wounded, millions of euros in property damages, including public property, and no arrests, no punishment, nothing. Now, I'll leave links in the low bar with all the incidents that I was able to find for that night, but mind you, the list is incomplete. And these occurred all before the guy in Nice went full Allahu Akbar and killed over 80 people and wounded over 100 more. Yet for some reason, those of us in the Islamo-critic sector of the society are labeled as being quote-unquote irresponsible, we're the irresponsible ones for saying that this could have been prevented. That's the official position of the French Prime Minister. But is it really irresponsible to say that if you have 13 Islamic clashes the previous night, it is only right and proper to have much tightened security at a public event taking place in a city known for its high number of jihadis? Is it really that irresponsible to say that a sensible government should have seen this coming? Is it? By the same token, for some reason, it is not irresponsible for all the hordes of leftists all over France and all over Europe really at large to join yet again to the chorus of apologetics. You know the drill. This has nothing to do with Islam, the terrorists are just isolated mentally ill individuals, yada 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 yada. Yet for some reason, all of these such attacks in the last 5 years happen to have in common either the name Mohammed or the religion of special needs, and most of the times, both. But noticing that is not deemed to be responsible by the supposed elites. It's only responsible when the plebs dare to think of approaches that put their interests above the interests of the religion of pieces. And that, my friends, is what a failed state looks like. Authorities being incapable of fulfilling even the most basic legitimate functions of a government, rapid erosion of the rule of law way beneath even the most basic aspects, and paralysis on the international state. That's a failed state, and that's exactly what France of the current year really is. Now, is the situation irrevocable? Of course not. Nothing is irreversible, neither civilization nor chaos. There is still plenty of time to replace the 3 days of mourning with 3 days of deporting. There is still plenty of time to remember that the French law allows the withdrawal of citizenship for those who can be deemed afterwards of having been unworthy of receiving it in the first place. There is still plenty of time to remember that there is such thing as Légion d'étrangers that can actually be deployed internally as well, and in fact is eager to help but has been prevented so far from doing so. There is still plenty of time to realize that the Republican law is not negotiable, especially for those living there out of the goodness and tolerance of the Frenchmen. But in order for these realizations to come to fruition, there is a need for a legitimate authority to make collective decisions. In other words, there is a need for a will to make France great again and move it away from being a failed state. Just saying. Anyway, with all of that being said, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you soon on Freedom Alternative.